Welcome to the Scottish Basketball Podcast. We post weekly episodes on the senior game in Scotland. You can join for free on Patreon, Spotify, and YouTube to receive a notification when new episodes are released. Access to the podcast episodes will always be free. You can make a contribution for yourself or for someone else as a gift through membership on Patreon. However small and infrequent, any contribution is very helpful and very much appreciated. You can get in touch with the podcast by sending us a message on Instagram or an email. If you like the content, share and send it to a friend who you think would like it too. In December 1955, Bobby Archibald was born in Paisley, the same town where 20 years on he would be turning out at senior level and beginning to make a name for himself across Scotland, Great Britain and continental Europe. By the time he eventually hung up his playing kit in the mid-90s, he had collected 15 Scottish Cup winners' medals, captained Murray International medals through their most successful run any Scottish club has ever put together, played in over 20 FIBA European Champions Cup ties, and shared the floor with Toni Kukoč, Dino Rađa, Mike D'Antoni, Arvydas Sabonis, and a Soviet national team fresh from Olympic gold. He never went fully professional, working from the day he left school until the day he eventually retired. Bobby's route into the organised game came through Crawford Fairbrother, a former Scottish high jump champion, who invited him along to a former pupils' meeting in Paisley, where pick-up games had started up. There he met the core of his first basketball community, Willie Cameron, Davy Wilson, Ali Drysdale and Alan MacDonald. A 17-year-old Bobby turned out for the Paisley senior men's side for the first time during the 73-74 season.
It was the Camp Hill former pupils. And the two Jordan Hill graduates came to help out, and it was Bill Edgar and David Beck. And they set up what was the Paisley and Renfrewshire, Paisley and Greenock basketball clubs.
Okay.
They were involved in it. And as I say, they come in part-time one afternoon a week from Jordan Hill and would do coaching for us.
Very good. So I'm just writing the bonus.
Anyway, we'll just start answering your questions for you. From the standard of the senior basketball league in 73, it was pretty good, but it was East Coast dominated. The Edinburgh teams were very much more developed than the West Coast teams, apart from Paisley. And Ron Mather shifted jobs. He was a school teacher, and he moved from Paisley to Castlehead. It was a new school in Paisley at the time, and that's where the Paisley club started from. He developed that, so we were catching up a little bit, but the guys on the Paisley team were seasoned campaigners already, so it was bringing in new people. And he got, a couple of good juniors came on board, local kids, and that was when the learning started.
There was a debut for the Paisley club themselves that season. The club's first European matchup was against Sparta Petronge of Luxembourg in the 1973-74 FIBA Cup Winners' Cup. The first leg was at Bellahouston Sports Centre on the 6th of November 1973, the away leg 10 days later at the Institut National de Sport, where Bobby would chip in with 2 points.
I've got a good one for you for the first trip to Luxembourg. It was my first time on a plane. I only ever saw planes going in and out of the airport. Never been on one. And it was the time there was a lot of power outages. There was some union trouble going on, and the power was going on off. And I was sitting next to Willie Cameron, and he said, "What if there's a power cut when we get back to land and they can't put the lights on? We'll be up here all night." And I was physically shaking.
Very good. What do you remember of like the actual, do you remember anything of the team that you played at in Luxembourg, or like did it just feel different playing over there to what you were used to in Scotland?
We were used to sitting on school gym benches, and they had chairs. They had a crowd. Not to say that we didn't get crowds, but you could count them on hands and feet. Very passionate, but not popular in that day. Obviously, it came in the following years. But it was, pretty rough sometimes. playing in a school gym, as they said.
Over those first couple of seasons, Paisley would finish 4th in the league and reach the semi-finals of the Scottish Cup. There was also a European tie the following season in the Coach Cup versus YMCA España. The summer Bobby was 18, an American touring side from the University of Wisconsin Parkside came over for a friendly in Paisley. He hosted one of the visiting players at home, fell into conversation with the coaching staff, and was offered a scholarship to go over and play in the States. The man behind it is believed to have been Moose Waltson, who had built Parkside into a serious NAIA programme. The scholarship, however, never came off. Paisley had reached the semi-finals of the Scottish Cup in 3 consecutive seasons, and then, in 1976-77, they beat Boroughmuir 82-88 at Meadowbank to lift the trophy for the first time. The following year, 77-78, they did it again, at the same venue, 74-70 against the same opposition. Boroughmuir had been the dominant side of the era, topping the National League both seasons, with the longest pedigree in the Scottish game.
I suppose in those early years, what was the rivalry with Boroughmuir like? They were obviously the dominant team at the time.
They were.
Those couple of Scottish Cup wins, so towards the latter part of the decade, like, I suppose, yeah, what was the rivalry like with them on and off the floor? And I suppose the sort of second question to that is, what changed for Paisley that sort of brought them closer?
Very carefully. They always appeared to be a little bit aloof.
Okay.
And that's a driving force for me. I love being the second gun. I'm going to go in and I'm going to prove myself that I'm there with them and for them when we're teammates in the national team. But when you're on that other end of the floor against me, I really don't care.
Of the 2 cup finals in the 70s, the Paisley Boroughmuir Cup finals, is there any one of them that sort of stands out as a more proud or more memorable win than the other?
The one, I've got a photograph of one of them, and I've got Ali Drysdale on my shoulders, and he's holding the cup up. Now, unfortunately, Ali passed away several years ago, but that for me was as good as it got at that time. To be part of a jumping, singing, cheering team. And we often tried to emulate rugby teams. You know, the sing-song at the end and having a beer and cheering. That was a sort of, why can't we do that? Well, you're going to have to win first.
What do you, I suppose, those first senior years at Paisley, like, what do you remember most about them? And I suppose of all the names that were sort of floating around, like, who do you look back on? Obviously, you mentioned Ali there. Like, who do you look back on, sort of sharing that time with the most?
My thoughts changed once the team started to get more professional players. So I used the word aloof earlier, it became more normal because everybody was getting good players now. There was a change in distribution of strengths, and everybody had to fight harder. I mean, the names Derek Frame and Stevie Hoffman come to mind. When Murray International started bringing all the dual nationals in, the American players, Derek, Stevie and myself became the three amigos. We sat at the end of the bench and stood up and cheered and clapped. We were the cheerleaders then. And I was playing at a decent level, but obviously the players that Murray International had brought in were, again, a league above. So it was fun to be part of it.
By the 1979-80 season, sponsorship money was beginning to flow into Scottish basketball for the first time, and player movement opened up across the country. Bobby left Paisley after 6 seasons with the senior side to play for Team Ultrascan, the Dalkeith Saints, who covered most of his fuel costs for the Glasgow to Edinburgh commute. Ultrascan reached the Scottish Cup final that season and lost to the newly emerging Murray Edinburgh, as well as competed in the Coach Cup.
Was there any reason why it was them? I know it was obviously you mentioned the commute from Glasgow at the time. Like, I suppose, did you have any other offers at that time, or was Dalkeith the only one? And I suppose, why did you? Why and how did you end up there?
Murray had already approached me, and I thought to myself, that team that he's putting together is full of characters, and I don't know if I want to be part of that. So it was, you know, he offered petrol money, he offered help, and eventually I got talking with Stuart Wilson, and he said, well, there might be a chance at a job. I'm a metallurgical engineer. That's where I started, that's where I finished. So he said, oh, I can get you maybe a job at Ultrascan as an NDT. And I thought, no, I don't want to be an NDT technician. I'm an engineer. So I went along anyway and thought, this is a better option right now. I don't need the job. I'll stay where I am, working at Babcock Power at the time as a welding engineer. So I would commute, get in the car in the morning, go to the office, leave the office 4:30, get through there for black as 6, train till 8, get back in the car, drive home, and get home at 9:30. And I did that for a year. And then my conversations developed with David Murray, who had just opened a business doing metallurgical testing and engineering, MTS. He says, would you consider a job there? And I thought, well, this is kind of more where I wanted to be. And you'll get a company car. And I thought, that'll do for me. I'm still commuting from Glasgow, but it's only 45 minutes to Livingston. And it made more sense from a professional point of view. So I was employee number 6. And he eventually sold us and bought Rangers. He sold us to a public company in the UK. And it was reported he made $9 million on the deal. So he was being his businessman again.
Always.
Yeah. And then, again, it just kept developing from there. I came out to the States to take over a newly acquired business that the PLC had started. And soon the American group I was running 7 businesses. So from a professional point of view, it made a huge impact in my career. And I think I said to you in one of the notes, when it talked about what your attitude was, and the one I wrote back to you was, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I'm a firm believer in that. If you give it 100%, you've got a great chance of getting 100% back.
David Murray was assembling a new club that would dominate Scottish basketball for the next decade and a half. Bobby joined Murray International Metals for the 1980-81 season alongside Lewis Young, John Spence and the rest under coach Ian McLeod. He was 24 at the time. The team won the league at the first time of asking. They lifted the cup. And Bobby was made captain almost immediately, a role he would hold for the rest of his playing career at the club.
You mentioned that obviously Murray had tried to sign you the previous year. So I suppose when you did walk into the Murray gym in 79, like I suppose what did you, obviously you thought there was characters the year before, like what did you walk into your first season there, like who were the characters, like, and what was the sort of standard of the players there, the ambition and the resources compared to Paisley, compared to Ultrascan?
Yeah, it was different from what I kind of thought it would be. It was relaxed but intense. If you know what I mean. The camaraderie was there right away because I'd played against them for a few years now, and as you got to know them, they weren't as bad characters as you thought they were. They were much more down to earth. And, it was often, that was a good game, let's go for a beer. And they would go to, I always remember, the Dean Hotel after the game, and you would have a pint, and I would drive back home to Paisley, and they would go their own way to wherever they lived. But it was getting together for that half hour that helped all the social stuff develop. and became a great bunch of friends.
You obviously picked up the captaincy within Murray quite early on. I suppose, what did the coach at the time, seeing you, what did the club want from you in that role? Like, was there the professional link as well? Or was it purely basketball? And I suppose, what do you think that they were looking for? What do you think they saw in you to give you that captaincy at quite an early age?
One of the things that I think I brought was commitment to getting the best out of people and with people. And I had been captain as the junior teams. I'd been captain of the Paisley team at one point, but it was really just to lead by example. And even going back to the Paisley days, we used to go to Bellahouston Park, and at the back of the park there was a hill. And for no reason, we would all go up there on a Saturday or a Sunday and do pyramid runs, where he would run up and down once, up and down twice, up to 5, and then back down to 1. And it was for enjoyment. So I did have some leadership skills. I mean, I was a sergeant in the boys' brigade and stuff like that you do when you're growing up. But I like to think I always committed and did what I could as hard as I could. It wasn't always the best, but you knew you would get 100%.
The Great Britain national team travelled to Switzerland for the 1980 European qualifying tournament for the Moscow Olympics under head coach Norm Sloan. Bobby went with the squad as the last man cut before the qualifiers proper. He was 24 in the form of his life and watched his teammates play for a games place from the stands.
I suppose the first time that you were involved with Great Britain, I suppose the 1980 European qualifying tournament.
Yeah.
So you obviously were the last player cut from that. I suppose how you were obviously playing very well to be that close to the team. How was that decision? Do you remember how that decision was delivered to you? And do you remember that conversation, or how do you remember that conversation looking back at it now?
I was destroyed. The coach, I don't know how much you know about it, but Coach Sloan was a college coach, excellent college coach at Florida. But he wanted to treat you like kids. Not do what I do what I say. And I'm the opposite. So my wife had just had Robert on the Saturday, and I flew out on the Monday to Florida for 2 weeks purportedly. And I knew I wasn't the 13th man, but at that time I smoked, and I would go for a beer, and he didn't like that. He made me shave my moustache off, as bad as it was. He made me shave it off as a commitment to the team. And again, I don't know if you know the name Kenny Walton. He had a walrus moustache, and he made him shave it. No facial hair. And I thought, I'm married, I've got a son, I'm 28 years old, and you're treating me like a 16-year-old. And I knew I was on the cusp, but there were a couple of 3 players there that I know I would have done better than. So, as I say, really disappointed, but happy to get back home and see my wife and baby.
From the 1980-81 season onwards, Murray Edinburgh entered the FIBA European Champions Cup as Scottish champions year after year, and the draws were enthralling as they were unforgiving. Den Bosch, Inter Slovnat and Haegby in 80-81, Barcelona, Asvel and Honved in 81-82, Freiburg in 82-83, Torpan Boyat and Barcelona again in 83-84. The Barcelona tie that second time was decided by 7 points on aggregate, 94-93 at the Camp Nou and 91-85 at home, coming about as close as any Scottish side has ever come to taking a genuine European giant out of international competition.
Yeah. I suppose, obviously from 80-81 onwards, obviously Murray were playing very regularly in the Champions Cup. Lots of high-profile games, Barcelona on a couple of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose, within the camp, where do you think Murray stood in continental terms in those years? And then I suppose, where did you feel like your strengths lay? Like, where did you feel like you could pick off these teams from time to time?
Honestly, I would have put us definitely in the top 20. The strides that they'd made by building that team, they were pulling in some of the best dual nationals. They were bringing in American nationals, and they had the cream of the Scottish game all in one room at the same time. And I think that was what, again, I don't know how well you know David Murray, but when he gets focused on something, he gets focused. And being second best isn't for him.
And I suppose, obviously, with the domestic dominance that you'd have had over the same period, how did the European competition sort of fit into that? Like, how do you compare playing Barcelona to the sort of intense rivalry with Solripe, with Team Glasgow, with the sort of teams of the 80s in Scotland?
Yeah. Well, again, at that time, Scotland would play in the Group C European Championships, and Spain were in Group A. So it had to be balanced up with imported players and the best of what you can get to make up the numbers, because it was a numbers game in those days. You were allowed 2 foreign nationals, 2 dual nationals, and that was it. So they tried to get the game at that time more Scottish, if you like. But then it kind of changed again, and dual nationals became nationals. So it was all to try and build and develop players and teams. And when it came to European competition, they were ahead of us. We made it to the B Championships once as a Scottish team. So it was always getting better. But we were, I'm not going to say a generation behind, but a few years behind in basic core skill development. It was a way, they used to call it Tanner ball. They'd run up and down the gym, bouncing the ball as hard as you could, and not have a basket at the end. So it was great to see professionalism and big crowds. As the career progressed and the team progressed, so did attendance numbers, so did fan engagement. So it was good to see the game grow, and I think I was lucky to be in the middle of it.
The Great Britain team went to France in May 1984 under head coach Tom Schneeman, looking to qualify for the Los Angeles Olympic Games. Drawn in preliminary round Group D with Israel, the Netherlands and Bulgaria, they came through in first place, beating the Netherlands and Israel before losing to the Bulgarians. In the final phase, they finished 7th of 8 behind a Soviet side that went unbeaten through the entire tournament. Bobby played in 8 of the 9 games, averaging 4.6 points and shooting 83% from the free throw line. His teammates of the tournament squad included Ralton Way, Seymour Hadwin, Pete Jeremick, Paul Stimpson and Pat Mullings.
By the time the 1984 Olympic qualifying tournament came around, obviously Coach Sloan had been replaced by Coach Schneeman. Obviously you're very much involved in the 12 that went to France for that qualifying tournament. I suppose, what was his coaching and team setup like? And I suppose, how did the squad come together for that qualifying tournament?
Yeah. Tom, I was fortunate that Tom was my coach. He brought structure and discipline. You had to know, we had books, 20-page books of offensive plays, and you had to know every option, because you might start in the 3 spot, but you'll end up in the 4 or the 5. And what happens if you play the 2 spot? You're going to have to run that play, so know it. And he got very, very intense. Probably the most intensive person I've ever met. But organised, playbooks, cheat sheets. Here's what they do. Here's what we found out about them. Play them left-handed, not right-handed. All sorts of things that he brought to the game. Very intelligent man.
In those 9 qualifying games, who do you remember most, if anyone, like teammate or opponent? Is there anybody individually you remember from that tournament?
Seymour Hadwin was a loopy one. Don Reid, who passed away as well, unfortunately. He was an extremely intelligent player. And believe it or not, I had a phone call on Tuesday from Paul Stewart. My wife and him swap messages every so often on Facebook, and he'd heard about John Clapperton. He was real buddies with John Clapperton. So Heather had sent him a quick note to say, sorry to hear about John, I knew you were close. John had actually visited him in California when he was out on one of his vacations. So it was really nice to talk to him, but it was a bit of a sad thing, you know. So, But he was cool.
I know from that tournament, so you obviously made it through the preliminary round. You obviously made it to the sort of final group of 8. The record, obviously, I think in the group of 8 was maybe 2-5. Like, was there ever a point, having got through that preliminary round, where you thought sort of qualification to the Olympics was possible? Obviously, it was something that GB wouldn't do for a good few years to come after that. Was there ever a point in that qualification tournament where you thought, we're on a run here, this is going our way?
Suddenly, we were playing at a level that we could compete. It wasn't 30-point blowouts anymore, although there were one or two. But, you know, we were expecting to be able to play against teams, keep up with them. And I think that was the development of the coaches that we were bringing in and the players that we were bringing in. Because, respectfully, a lot of the coaches in Scotland have only ever coached in Scotland. They don't see different training techniques. They don't see different methods. And bringing in big, you know, coaches from the States, where they've got 4-year programs, you know, that's organisation and discipline. And those are key to a team game. It is a team game. You might have a player that can score 40 points, but he doesn't dribble the ball up the court, make 6 moves round the post and then score on his own. He's got a team game to play.
Yeah.
And a good coach will get the team to play the team's strengths. And it might be that if you can get a good layup, take it. Lewis Young's a great shooter, but sometimes it's easier to get 2 2-point layups than 1 3-point shot. So things like that help the game develop.
Murray Edinburgh relocated to Livingston and the Forum Arena for the 86-87 season, and were drawn against Olimpia Milano in the European Champions Cup first round. Milan's roster included Mike D'Antoni, the American point guard who would later coach Phoenix, New York, Houston and the Lakers in the NBA. Murray lost on aggregate 184-166, with the home leg ending in a loss 83-101.
When Murray moved to the Forum in Livingston in 86, I suppose one of the first games that would have been in the arena would have been Milan in the European Champions Cup. I suppose that Milan team had Mike D'Antoni. Like, what does he look like as a player in your memory on that court in Livingston in 86?
The wee boy from Paisley was on the court with Mike D'Antoni. What story is that? You know, it was kind of awe-inspiring and frightening at times. But then I thought, wait a minute, I'll work to get here. I put in all the effort. Our team put in all the effort to get there. So enjoy it. And although they hammered us at one point, seeing that level of skill in the Forum in Livingston, that's incredible. And I'll compliment David Murray on that. That was where he wanted to be. He had a vision, he had a plan, and he went as far as he could with it.
What do you actually remember of that match and like trying to slow down that Milan team? Like, obviously it was a game, an aggregate game that they won comfortably, but like, what do you remember at that time with the team that Murray would have had? Like, where did your strengths lie? And I suppose what were you going to have to do to slow down a very dominant Milan team at that point?
It was just better defensive effort. There's no doubt they were good scorers, but they were a better offensive team than we were a defensive team. And the old adage, defence wins championships.
The 1987-88 season marked the start of the professional basketball era at a British level. After years dominating the Scottish domestic game, Murray Livingston entered the Carlsberg League, the newly formed top tier of British professional basketball. Murray finished third in the league in their debut campaign with a 22-6 record behind Portsmouth and Kingston. In 1988-89, Murray entered the World Invitation Club Basketball Championships at the Crystal Palace National Sports Centre. They were drawn against the Soviet national team in the semi-finals. The Soviets had won Olympic gold in Seoul, South Korea that summer, beating the United States in the semi-final and Yugoslavia in the gold medal game. Livingston would beat the Soviets by 6. They went on to take the title of the whole Crystal Palace tournament against Bayer Leverkusen, 71-62 in the final. By any reasonable measure, that semi-final ought to sit amongst the great nights in the history of Scottish basketball.
The 88 World Club Championship at Crystal Palace, the tournament when Murray beat the Soviet national team, fresh off Olympic gold, and then beat Leverkusen in the final. Like, just talk through that tournament. Like, what do you remember of the build-up? Who was playing for Murray at that time? Who hit the shots in those games? And I suppose where in the building was the atmosphere coming? Like, did it feel like, I suppose, being Livingston and Palace at that time, like, was there support for you in what you were doing, or like where did you feel like the energy was at that time?
I think we were the surprise of the tournament, to be honest. And a lot of the English fans were supporting us, which in those days was unheard of. If I remember, it was Tommy Collier who was playing, and Rolton, and Victor Fleming. Now, I'm at the edge of my memory here, so
no, that's okay.
But I think Victor Fleming, Tommy Collier, and Rolton were there. Altenburg was still at Crystal Palace then. Yeah, so there was Lewis. No, Lewis wasn't there. Yeah, so we're at the back end of it then.
What do you remember now of that tournament? Do you remember the games themselves, or like do you remember lifting the trophy afterwards? Like what sticks in your mind from that tournament? Obviously, two sort of remarkable results.
One of the funniest ones was during the game, someone smacked me on the nose and broke it. So it was bleeding really heavily. So they took me downstairs and plugged it up, put the old cottonwood pads in it and bandages and lint. So I'm in my uniform, the sweat's running off me and the blood's all over my uniform. And I go back into the arena. And the security guard goes, "Stop, where's your pass?" I'm watching the game going on. He's not letting me back in because I don't have my pass. So that was another entertaining one.
Livingston would finish second in the Carlsberg League that season with 16 wins from 20 games, 2 wins behind Glasgow Rangers, who were coached by Kevin Cado. Rangers also won the 89 BBL Cup final against Murray by 3 points. Bobby was on the bench as an assistant to head coach Ian Gordon in that game, having been out for the season with injury. The two squads were stacked with players who had spent the bulk of their careers playing with and against each other in the Scottish League.
The 89 Cup final between Rangers and Murray, I suppose obviously by that time there was the two Scottish teams in what was then the Carlsberg League. There was obviously, as you've spoken about before, rivalry verging on hatred. Like, where did for it to be the first year where the two teams were in the league and two teams without sort of massive history, like where did that heat come from so quickly?
It's again probably some of the coaches, some of the players, and I'm very careful. I don't like to use the word hatred. But I used the really scale. So if I really, really, really don't like you, that's the bad one. But no, it was just the buzz behind the teams wanting to be ranked. Again, joining the Carlsberg League was a chance for the Scottish group to make a name for the team and the organisation in the UK. And some of these guys didn't like each other. It was almost like a competition, like a one-on-one. I'm going to dominate you, and that's it. I don't care about the rest of them. So the team aspect was the group strength, but there was lots of individual things that went on. I had one with John Johnson at Crystal Palace. He and I squared up against each other in a game, and I put my fists up and I says, "All right, come on then." And before I knew it, he had slammed me in the face, and I was on my back. So that got heated, and sometimes it was personal.
That was the season that you were out injured and you were on the bench with Ian Gordon as a sort of pseudo assistant coach.
Yes.
Is that a final you wish you'd been on the floor for? And I suppose how do you think you'd have handled it differently if you were playing rather than coaching?
I was always more passionate as a player. Being involved in the game, the physical demands of a game, I feel are more important sometimes than the mental aspects of the game. Although now the mental aspect is there. It's definitely a thinking man's game. What if? That was why Tom Schneeman used to, make you run poor positions and play drills.
In 1989, when Murray they'd won their first round Champions Cup tie against Scotland, and then they drew Split, I suppose, who at the time would have been the sort of completely dominant European club side. They'd won Champions Cup the year before. They would go on to win it that season. They'd win it the following season. So they were very much the dominant team of that time. Murray played against them. You played against a host of remarkable players of that era. I suppose what was it like sharing a floor with them? And I suppose with Kukoč in particular, like, could you see at that time just what a dominant player he obviously was, and then would go on to have the rest of his career?
Mm. What I actually wrote on your sheet was awe-inspiring. Again, I said it earlier, they've gotten to that level and play against those players and not be overwhelmed. You'd put a lot, by this stage, we put a lot of work into things, physically, mentally. And now suddenly to be against the technically world champions, that was incredible.
When you were playing that home leg against them, like obviously, as I said, they'd won the European title the previous year. Like playing them that early in that year's competition, did it already feel like they were on their way to that second title? Did they just feel, of all the amazing elite European teams that you'd played over the past probably 6-7 seasons at that point, like did they feel a cut above? Like did they feel like they were sort of destined to that sort of greatness that they'd sort of show for the next couple of seasons?
They did exude confidence, I've got to say that. But it was disappointing that we'd gotten this far and not quite made it. Still got a lot of emotion for the game. And then to have a sellout crowd watching, again, unheard of.
As the professional Murray era came to an end, or this was the professional Livingston era came to an end, and it sort of obviously transformed into the Bulls. Obviously, you continued playing. You domestically were incredibly dominant with that team, and as your career continued to your mid to your late 30s and your early 40s, did you ever sense? Was there ever a game where you sensed like, okay, that was the last cup final, or that was the last season? Obviously, that then contrasts with the number of times where you retired and then would come back again.
Yeah, Frank Sinatra was my nickname. When I retired once, and then I couldn't bear not doing anything. An old buddy of mine, David Weems, he and I decided we would run the Edinburgh Marathon. And I hated running. And we used to run around Kirtliston and Queensferry. There was a back road between them. And it was about 10 miles. So he hurt his back and put his back out as we were halfway into the road build-up. I never ran again because I didn't like running on my own, never mind. So when it got to the third time, I was ready. The body was starting to ache and not recover quickly. I was the old physio Jane McBriarty, she was taping me up. One time I actually taped my ankle locked because I was wanting to get back. I couldn't stay out because it was only a sprained ankle. So at that time I was actually 39, and the body just said no more.
Across your international career with both Scotland and Great Britain, is there a single performance that you would point to as the one that you would want to be remembered for the most ahead of any other sort of international or any of the club nights? Is there a single international performance where you'd like to make note or be remembered for?
I'm thinking there were two games. One was a European Cup match at Meadowbank. Bill Miller was a coach. I can't remember who we were playing, but it was anyway. I was on a streak. I had made 13 jump shots in a row. Hadn't missed a shot the whole game, and I took one from the left corner, and I hit the back ring and came out. And Bill Miller shouted at me, "What the fuck are you doing? Shooting that shot?" And I thought, it's the first one I've missed. So that was quite funny. And then obviously beating England in the home championships. Matt Valence, I don't know if you know Matt.
Not personally, no.
But I know the name. He was a porter at the time. And I went on a breakaway and I went up to dunk the ball. And I tried to dunk it so hard, it came out the end of my fingers, hit the back of the ring, and went over the halfway line going the other way. And England got a fast break, 2 points. And he ripped me for that one. And all I wanted to do was beat England.
I've heard that from a few people, to be fair.
Yeah, so he posted the other day the whole scenario again.
You've mentioned it a few times, obviously, earlier on as well. Like, I suppose just a final. Obviously, you played at a very high level throughout your playing career, whilst always maintaining, ultimately amateur, ultimately sort of part-time. You maintained a sort of a very successful career at this, parallel. I suppose, was there ever a point where you really thought that one was going to swallow the other? Was there a point where you really thought? Well, I suppose firstly, obviously, you've spoken about what it was to have both going on, but was there ever a point where you thought that one was going to really take over the other? And I suppose, how did you come back from that point?
No, for me, it was a balancing act. I had a very strong wife behind me who helped me achieve the things that I really wanted to achieve. And that was playing in the European Championships. That was playing at the highest level that I could play at within reason. I mean, it would be leave the house at 7 in the morning and get home at 10:30 at night. That was the early part of my career when it was Dalkeith and Moray International until I finally moved through to the East Coast. We moved to Kirtliston. And that was when it was still long days. And the company that I was working for, the metallurgical laboratory, was really starting to take off. So there were times when I would go down and play in a Carlsberg League game in Derby and come back, get back at 2 in the morning, be up at 7 o'clock to start again. So there was physical demands. And as I say, Heather had to look after the kids, the house and me. So great support, or I wouldn't have been able to do it.
I suppose just a couple of points to conclude on yourself, Bobby. I suppose what are you most proud of in your playing career? And I suppose, yeah, if there's anything else that's not been mentioned, like what would you like to be remembered or acknowledged for from your playing days?
I think my work ethic. Whenever I committed. And at times, as I say, doing extra training runs and shuttle runs just to be, and it's a cliche, but the best you can be. But it works. It's proven it works. And I think my longevity is a testament to that support system. The only other thing I was going to is it was being a good teammate and bringing others along. And I think those are things that I worked on.